Welcome everybody, I'm back from the woods and I haven't cashed in as a Costas, but that's not important because today we have a very special episode. The love for a spec that has been, I don't know, forever intriguing, at least for you, and you always did it daunting. Subbrogue, baby, Subbrogue. And for today's list of guests, we have Fu, who is a Subbrogue extraordinaire from the Ravenhall Discord. We have Mystler, of course. You probably know him by now, helping with the guides and also in the latest Rogue podcast. And Mr. Whispyr, who I promise I will not fuck up his name again. I take this opportunity to... Listen, I already made the thumbnail, so it's double, triple, four, quadruple checked. It's all good. But I'm gonna shut up. Let's let the people talk a little bit about this. So starting with Fu.
Hey, I'm Fu. I started doing theory crafting in Legion. I'm also an active mod in Ravenhold. I'm also maintaining the bot for them, and in real life I'm studying computer science, so quite boring, but it's okay.
Not boring, man. I think you need a little bit of science to pull off Subbrogue. Not really these days, but we're going to talk about that for sure. Thanks so much, man. Hey, Mistler.
Hello. Yeah, people might know me from the last one. I'm Mystler. I'm also active theory crafter on Ravenhold. I'm currently writing the guides for the specs on Wowhead, and I'm dabbling in all things TC, especially the programming aspects with implementing stuff in simulation craft, working on additional sites like hero damage.
Yeah. Big boy Mystler working on a lot of stuff. And last but not least, Mr. Whispyr.
Hi, so like Mistler, you probably know me from the last one, if you saw that, but I'm mostly handling the day-to-day questions in chat. I have been doing the pins as well for this patch, running sims and stuff. I also do a little bit of theory crafting here and there when it, is needed or when I have an idea about it. But obviously, Mystler and Koji and those kind of people, they handle most of the hard work on that side.
Well, I have to say, first of all, before actually getting into contact with Mystler, I remember Fu actually helping us with our, I think, 8.2.5 guide for sub. Yeah. And after our last chat with Whispyr, I've understood a lot of things, especially about stats in this game. It became so much more relaxed, a much more relaxing field. Oh, I have 30% crit. Okay, no problem. Oh, I have 10% haste. Really good. Fuck it. But we're gonna get into a lot of things, and thank you guys all for taking the time and joining us. It's gonna be a blast of a discussion. And as always, on these podcasts for the specs, I'm going to ask you individually, what iteration was the best for Subbrogue? In which expansion or patch? Let's start with Fu again.
My favorite, I'm totally based because I did so much work on the iteration in Simcraft. My favorite one is the end of Legion 1, the one that was surrounded by DFA.
Right.
And mainly because I liked the structure of it, because you had a set, you had a build up, and at the end, if you did everything correct, you did an insane amount of damage in a really short time frame, and then you started again to build up, and it had a good rhyme, and you also could always change up things in the rotation to alter where you want to damage. If you want to damage on AoE, you used your cooldowns before they're from above. If you wanted to be more a single target, you used some before, some after. So you could change up things and decide where to get your damage. And in addition to that, had this big FA hit that always showed up on the damage meta and bumped you up and made you hyped.
It's part of loving the spec, pulling it off correctly and getting those numbers in, right?
So big numbers are what's
yeah. So I'm guessing, Fu, you're more of a fan of the rework moving from WoD to Shadowlands to Legion. Sorry, because at least in terms of Shadowlands, that used to work a tad different before Legion, or did they do the rework in WoD? Don't remember.
Actually,
what's with the charges?
Shadowlands was like a 1 minute cooldown with 10 seconds duration in WoD, and they changed it up to be a shorter cooldown with cooldown reduction.
Yeah.
But at the end of PFA, Legion, not PFA, end of Legion, Shadowlands was a rather short cooldown. It was 4 seconds. And you also had 25 to 30 seconds cooldown. So in the end, you even used Shadowlands less, or you spent less time in Shadowlands.
Yeah.
What is kind of hand in hand with the Draenor iteration? Like Draenor iteration had like 25 to 30% of the time where it ends, or even less, and the more modern iterations like PFA and now Shadowlands lean more towards like a long dance with, I don't know, up to 50% dance uptime.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Let's see, Mistler. What do you think the best iteration was? Are you on the same page here?
It's actually a tough one because I love the spec in many of its forms. As wildly different as they are. I kind of agree objectively with that the DFA iteration was fairly cool. Like, you had big hits and it worked out well at the time that it was live. I just don't really agree with it subjectively because I never really enjoyed DFA with the positional thing and the idea of spamming an ability while you are in flight with an ability where you cannot move. So that was always a bummer for me to make that my favorite iteration. It's a really tough one. What originally brought me to switch to sub, I started raiding on Assassination because it was the easy one, the easy spec to get into. But then back in Blackrock Foundry, somebody told me, "Hey, did you check out sub? It's actually pretty fun." I was like, "Okay, I can give it a try." And that was the first iteration that I really played in PvE. And I think that was pretty enjoyable. It was a lot about min-maxing the find weakness uptime, which is something that we kind of got back. We have find weakness back now, but it doesn't really matter in any way. So that was an interesting iteration to play with. I don't remember what exactly the tier bonus at the time was, but I still remember that fondly as the first sub-iteration that I played, with both being about the dance every minute and min-maxing find weakness in between. We had stuff like preparation back then to get more vanish out.
Yeah.
That was a very fun one in terms of gameplay. And then after that, we have the very famous iteration from Hellfire Citadel, which is kind of similar to it, but was emphasized by the extreme burst from the Legendary Ring and the Soul Capacitor Trinket. Personally, I think I've always leaned more on preferring the BRF iteration because it was mostly a gameplay-driven thing. But I also, of course, remember the HFC iteration fondly for just topping the damage meters with all that burst, pumping it out there. So I do have to mention this one, even if I think it was leaning too heavy on the damage curve of do all your damage in the first 20 seconds of the game and then go AFK.
Fair enough.
So much for the first two iterations that I've played and that I think were also both pretty cool. I'm also a very big fan of the spec fantasy themed rework we got in Legion. I think I've enjoyed pretty much in general at least, I've enjoyed pretty much every iteration of the gameplay of sub since the rework. I like this doubling down on the shadow damage fantasy. I like that ambush was renamed to Shadow Strike. I think the teleport is really cool. We've seen a lot of I think since then the most defining aspect of the spec was the uptime on Shadowlands, as Fu also mentioned. And I've never been one who's really favoring heavily on any kind of Shadowlands uptime. I like the iterations that had a little less, but I also never minded the iteration like in I think that was early Nighthold, where you pretty much had 3 charges of Shadowlands all the time. The uptime was enormously high. I didn't think I used like 10 backsteps maybe in one single fight at most. I never really mind that iteration either, so I'm not leaning heavily towards that. I just like the spec as a whole. I just want to end with that what I kind of like about the current iteration that we have is that we saw some editions like Black Powder. I'm personally a fan of Black Powder and giving subtlety something for the AoE. Okay, I triggered Fu.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it.
Fine.
Carry on with that one, but I like seeing something done about sub AoE, which has always been something that I saw as something that it is lacking. Whether that is for a reason or not is something a different topic, but I kind of like it. So Whispyr.
All right, Whispyr. How about you?
So I'm in the Fu versus Mistler here. I think I'm mostly on Mistler's side. I too started playing Sub Rogue in Blackrock Foundry. I also played it in Hellfire Citadel. Even though people know me as like the Assassination guy, I didn't actually play Assassination until, I don't know, like the end of Emerald Nightmare. Through all of WoD, I was sub in combat. So I think back fondly of when I started playing. I might have a sort of bias against it. But to me, the sub fantasy has always been kind of like really bursty. And I feel like this whole like preparation to go into a dance, doing big burst, and then kind of like hanging back, waiting in the shadows, however edgy you want to be about it, and then going back in, to the next dance. That's always been sort of how I think of sub in my head, how I want it to play. So I also don't like the high uptime on dance. I think that the bursty iteration was better, playing around Find Weakness and kind of having that extended opener for 40 seconds or however long you could keep Find Weakness up for. I personally like that a lot more. But I do think that the Legion rework did add some stuff that was really good for the spec. The most notable of which being Symbols of Death. I think Symbols of Death is a really strong ability. Just gameplay and fantasy wise. I think it plays really well into the spec, stacking cooldowns now. But yeah, I think that if I had to choose my favorite one, it would be like Mystler, sort of the mid to late WoD gameplay. Although I do agree that with DFA, it was very fun at the time. I have a lot of fond memories of what's that boss called? Kingara?
Yes.
In Antaurus.
Spot where you always
every single time. So the boss was basically in the middle of this giant donut, right? So the platform was like a ring, and there was a boss in the middle. And the strategy was always to stand in front of the boss at like sort of the entrance. But every time you DFA'd, it went to a fixed point on the boss, which happened to be exactly on the opposite side of the raid stack. So every time you DFA'd, it would always take you to the opposite side of the boss, and you would just be out of the range of the healers, and it was just a nightmare to play.
By the way, public service announcement. I don't ask me why I found it out, but if you use the Skalka's Wing trinket that we currently have on Kingaroth, it will also jump you to that position. Go ahead.
The more you know.
Yeah. So I have fond memories of that, even though it's complete garbage. I would like to see DFA return personally, but perhaps without the animation locking and janky movement and coming back down and all that. But I think it was a really cool ability, just all in all.
I mean, it's a PvP talent now.
Can I ask the question? Yeah. Did you stand where you land with DFA on King Earth, or did you just use it from in front of the boss?
Oh no! I was a DFA I was a DFA as you land person.
Okay, because this is important, because I don't know, I don't think a lot of people did realize this. The animation time is longer if you stand away and fly, and you don't even get the DFA alignment with Shadowlands if you do the long jump. So you did really kill your DPS a bit.
To be fair, the whole jumping around, I just switched specs anyways after a while. So,
but there were good things about it too. Like on certain bosses, you could use DFA to dodge things. Even on King Gerard, you could, like the swirly balls that fly around, you could use it and jump over them. It was so satisfying to do.
That's true, yeah.
That from above is a PvP title now, right? For all rogue specs, or? 'Cause I remember seeing it on Outlaw, right? Or
I don't. Outlaw does Assassination and sub.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was on all 3 specs in Legion, but they removed it from most.
Yeah, it's
it was great when you could use it to dodge things. It was horrible when you used it to kill yourself. Or I remember on the Iron Maiden encounter where you spawned these orbs that explode. I remember spawning one while I was in the air with DFA. And
no way.
Things like that. There's so many stories.
it enables
but you could like use DFA to transit with the boss on Iron Maiden. So if you used it right, you needed to use cloak because you would instantly be stunned else. But you could like fly over the hole and land just where she was and start attacking again. It was awesome.
Right, there was one thing that I wanted to ask you guys, because I don't know a lot about Rogue, but from an outside perspective, I cannot help but draw these parallels, and maybe you guys can explain it to a noob like me. Basically drawing a parallel between 8.0 and 9.0 patches, because at the beginning of BFA, sub was really good up until Zul. I think everybody knows the big nerf hammer that came. And then again, sub was really good at the beginning of Nathria, right until they hammered down again on it. So there's clearly, from where I can tell, because sub was one of the specs that I considered in beta to main, but it kind of went through a lot of changes, even through beta, one of the specs that went through the most amount of changes. So I kind of got the feeling that maybe devs didn't know exactly what to do with this spec. And the way that it's really good, sometimes then it just drops down, at least in performance, makes me realize that maybe they don't know how to balance it. What do you guys think? Why is it hard for the devs to make sub competitive consistently at the very least? Because at least in the last couple of years, it has seen ups and downs, and in BFA, at least for the first patch, I don't remember seeing a lot of sub rogues.
So the thing about that is sub rogue was really strong in beta, but that was mostly because it had a lot of either broken interactions, or at the early stages of beta when Legendaries were first being introduced, Akari's was completely broken.
Yeah, it was some
it basically just doubled all combo point generation, which obviously is very strong, and it made our DPS just go absolutely ballistic. So that was always destined for a nerf. Like, even if you look now at the 15% Legendaries or whatever, Akari's was like, I don't know, I think 60 or something.
Yeah. 60 or
yeah,
60.
it was like a 60% legendary for damage. So it was bound to happen, but people got overhyped on it, and then obviously when that got changed, it obviously tanked. You saw a lot of sub at the start of Nathria because Sin was so bad. Obviously the Outlaw players, they'll still play Outlaw. But the people who wanted to play sub and wanted to play Sin wasn't an option. So you actually saw a lot of sub at the start of the tier. And then sub didn't actually receive any changes. There was a couple nerfs in PvP, but in PvE, there was no changes to sub. The only thing that happened was Sin became very strong. It got multiple aura buffs. It got a legendary buff. It got cut to the chase as a passive, which was a buff. So all of the buffs combined just made Sin so good that you saw sub falling out of favor, not by the fault of sub, but just by Assassination being so much stronger eventually.
Didn't they nerf the Mark of the Assassin at some point? Because I remember
that was a PvP nerf.
Only for PvP, was it?
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right.
Slash whitelisting the crit to not exploit necrotic wake stuff.
Oh yeah, that was also a nerf. That was for the narcotic wake stuff. It also affected trinkets, but it wasn't that big of a change. It nerfed trinkets a little bit, so like the big hitters, Skulkers and Dreadfire, you couldn't guarantee crits on those anymore, which hurt a little bit, but that was a nerf for a lot of other rogues, and we didn't really play Master Assassin.
Yeah.
We didn't really play Master Assassin anyways in raids, so it was mostly Mythic Plus that it got hit.
In general, I think what Whispyr mentioned is kind of a reoccurring theme with Sub Rogue. It's never really that Sub got nerfed or hammered. Aside from that Zul reaction, where they kind of annihilated the niche of really amazing priority damage. It still has good priority damage, but not to the degree that we saw in Zul. I think the general thing with Sub is that it was just not receiving changes with what was causing the problems. It's kind of funny when people ask, "Oh, Sub is so bad. What did they change to make it bad?" They didn't change anything, which is exactly the problem here. It's kind of the spec that needs ongoing tuning and being looked at again to see where it's good and where it's lacking. And I think this is where the mix comes into what you said when you brought up the question. I'm not sure if Blizzard is completely sure on what they want to do with the spec or where they want to see the spec in meters in what situations. They seem to be too hesitant to really do this ongoing investment into how the spec should possibly be tuned and what its strength should be, which is why they are so reluctant to make changes, and then it just starts to fall behind over the iterations. We've seen that for a while now.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Fu, on this?
I mean, I can just more or less repeat what those two are saying, because in the end, the problem was not only that Assassination got like 25% buff overall, it was also that other melee specs and range specs got buffed. So we were not really high on the damage at the beginning, and we over the time just dropped down while everything around us got buffed up. So we ended up in not the best place.
Speaking of buffs and changes and things, I'm guessing all of you guys got to see what the couple of changes for Sub Rogue on 9.1. I would like to remember after. I know backstabs damage is getting a slight buff, if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't really. We're gonna take them step by step, but I didn't really understand the tuning for Black Powder. Was it? They're nerfing the damage for Black Powder, but they're buffing the combo point.
They nerfed the burst damage of Black Powder and buffed the sustained damage more or less. Right. Black Powder has two parts. One is the interaction with Find Weakness, the shadow part.
Right,
One is the physical part on hit. And it nerfed the Find Weakness interaction and buffed the physical part up. So overall, it means we have less burst, but more sustained AoE.
Is that good?
Well, the question, it's a good question, because the problem with AoE and with Black Powder is because Mystler likes it, I don't like it. We both, the fun part about Sub is that you can adjust your damage to the situation. So you can say I do single target damage in AoE, I can use Eviscerate, and you can say I want to do AoE damage, I use Black Powder. The problem is that you always sacrifice something. if you do single target, your AoE sucks. And if you do AoE, your single target sucks. And that's the problem. And with Mythic Plus and short pulls, having burst AoE is actually usually better than having sustained AoE. But how good change is will really depend how high the target count is on encounters and how big the pull sizes will be in Mythic Plus. The fun thing is the change means that you can now use black powder on lower targets. Up to now you used it on 5 targets or 4 targets, depending on if Find Weakness was up. And with the new change, you can use it with 3 targets. This means that our 3 target cleave is overall like 4% better. I did a short simulation yesterday about it. It means we go on 3 targets from being like 25% behind to maybe 15 to 20% behind the other 2 specs. So it won't like make us really good in cleave situations.
Got it. What do you think about the changes, Mistler?
I was surprised to see this specific subset of changes. I was used to sub not getting any changes at all. So first thing I was
it's a good start
seeing changes at all. But I was kind of expecting them to go for the low-hanging fruit of just bumping up the spec aura, and I would have been perfectly fine with that, to be honest. And I was very surprised to see this very specific set of changes. Both kind of somewhat positively, but also somewhat negatively. The positive thing is that they are kind of sending messages now, which I think is a good thing. We are seeing specific changes to buff sub AoE. So that seems to imply that they want to see that sub has some kind of sustained AoE. Either that or they just made randomly changes, but let's assume that there was some
it's targeted
behind it.
Yeah.
So there was pretty specific thing. They wanted to apparently buff that sub has the sustained AoE with more black powder damage and having the Find Weakness part matter less, as we explained already. There was also a critical strike chance increase on Shuriken Storm, which gives a higher chance to have Find Weakness on as many targets as possible at all to benefit from that rank 2. And overall together, these changes make sub AoE quite good. I ran some simulations around we have an 8 target cap. So in the area of like 6 to 8 targets. And in sustain AoE, sub is really strong and has not much problem beating Outlaw, which is kind of the AoE rogue spec.
Really?
In terms of pure AoE numbers, then the AoE numbers look really good. The funny thing is now what Fu mentioned with the kind of choosing between priority focus damage or AoE damage, which is something that Outlaw has kind of baked in naturally.
Yeah.
You always do a lot of damage on your main target anyway, and then Blade Flurry cleaves off of that. Whereas Sub has to choose between Eviscerate for priority damage or Black Powder for AoE damage. And this decision is kind of what shifts it in any way. I would now call Outlaw the straightforward AoE option and Sub the one where you can commit to Black Powder and do better AoE damage than Outlaw potentially. At the cost of pretty much doing not any focus damage at all anymore. Versus you use Eviscerate when Outlaw just has much better AoE again and Sub has no AoE. So that's kind of the decision to make. And in the end, that probably averages out somewhat depending on how much you switch between the two playstyles. It's an interesting thing. I kind of like this choice. Fu is not a big fan of this choice. We will see how it plays out, I guess. But yeah, I'm at least happy to see Sub getting a little more attention for the AoE because Sub has overall had pretty weak AoE. So I'm curious to see how the numbers play out. I don't expect Sub to be a competitive spec towards what we would call the AoE powerhouses, like, Mage and other specs that are not even target capped.
Ellie Shaman. Crazy buff in 905.
At least happy to see some AoE buffs. And on the other side, though, what matters more to me in the end is the single target damage, because that is still kind of what sub is about and brought for, if we speak from a strictly PvE and raid context. So the AoE changes matter a little for that. And to do something for single target, what they did is they touched shadow techniques, which was also surprising. They tried to buff single target damage by giving a damage increase to Backstep and Gloomblade. That change is kind of whatever, because they are filler spells that we somewhat try to avoid using at all if we don't have to. But Shadow Techniques is the one that really increases the single target damage here. They weren't very specific about what they changed, but we found out how it works. So Shadow Techniques, to quickly go into that, has been the random energy and combo point regeneration. It was based on 4 to 5 auto attacks before, so every 4th auto attack you had a 50% chance to proc it. And if you didn't proc it on the 5th auto attack, you got the guaranteed proc.
Guaranteed, yeah.
And they reduced that by 1 to the 50% chance on 3 auto attacks and to the guaranteed one on every 4th. So that is overall a buff to the passive energy and combo point regeneration that subtlety rogues have. And that is also the part that makes it matter the most in single target. So, and what buffs it there. In the quick preview sims that I ran about it, sub single target damage was about to get closer to Assassination again. Not beat it, but I'm at least happy to see it not like 5 to 6% behind or even more than it used to.
Well, what about you, Whispyr? You feel the threat of sub-rogue coming in for the Assassination?
So, as Mistler said, sub single target after the buffs looks pretty good. It looks to be a little bit behind Sin, but not by much. However, the kind of outlier here is that subtlety is the one spec that really, really enjoys the Venthyr legendary.
Was gonna get into that, but let's kick it off. Sure.
So the whole thing about the Venthyr legendary, Outlaw doesn't really like Venthyr that much. They all kind of prefer Necro, mostly because Outlaw, this big Mythic Plus spec, Necro obviously very good in Mythic Plus. I think Venthyr is ahead in single target.
Yes.
But you don't really see a lot of Venthyr Outlaw rogues. Assassination kind of plays Necro right now as well. They started off with Venthyr, but after some optimizations and now a bug fix on the PTR, Necro is looking very, very close to Venthyr in single target for Assassination as well. So the obvious choice is to go Necro, but then there's Subtlety, which is kind of a little bit weird in that regard, because Necro isn't that great for sub. But they really, really like Venthyr because of the legendary. The legendary reduces the cooldown of Flag. Flag being the ability where if you deal finishers in the time frame, it does extra shadow damage, and also gives you some stats. In this case, with the legendary, it also gives you Verse instead of just the normal haste. And Subtlety really enjoys Verse as well, so this is kind of a win-win. It's shadow damage, the cooldown gets reduced, so it's just more, and you also get versatility, which is a good stat. With that legendary, it actually seems like it might beat Sin. Fingers crossed, maybe. But the problem with obedience right now on PTR is that we assumed that it was a 24-second buff on the versatility, which would have made it quite strong. And in my sims, I had it just edging out Assassination with 24 seconds. However, unlike the haste, which lingers after the first 12 seconds, so you build the stat for 12 seconds and it lingers. That doesn't seem to work that way with the versatility when you have the legendary equipped, which is very confusing because it seems logical that the versatility would linger along with the haste. But the way it works right now is you just build for 12 seconds and then it disappears, which does hurt the legendary a fair amount. And it will probably still be good, but you won't be seeing subtlety beating Assassination on a pure patchwork fight.
But like in terms of like the legendaries for 9.1, the Covenant legendaries, talking about the hey, there's a cute cat, hey, cat.
Hey,
It's a feral druid in a Subrogue podcast. What?
Yeah, the one wanted some bleeds.
Yeah. Would it be? You mentioned for sub the Ventir legendary. Would it be competitive? Because you guys run the Sims. Would it beat like I don't know? What was it Finality? I don't know if it was.
Yes, the big bonus for 9.1 is that Subtlety finally gets legendary that is more than a 5% damage increase.
Right.
Like Outlaw has 2 of them or 3, and Assassination has 2 of them, and Subtlety has only 5% increases, and there's a like 2 or 3% difference in relative DPS gain from the legendary items across the 3 specs, and Sub gains the least and is also like around that behind on single target. So if like the Venture legendary is bug fixed, we probably can go on par with Assassination on single target.
Interesting. Nothing to mention about the. I know Whispyr talked about the Necrolord, which doesn't really favor sub. What about Echoing Reprimand? Well, I always found that the most interesting ability out of them all because it has the mini game. Did you guys run any sims on the Echoing Reprimand, or do we have it on the PTR? The legend.
Kyrian just sucks.
That's it. Fuck it. Kyrian sucks.
Right. See you next week.
That's basically the end of it. It's just Kyrian sucks.
Come on, man. Don't you like the mini game? You know, just to press your finisher at the blue combo point. You know.
In terms of comparing the Covenant abilities, Sub has always had the advantage with the Venthir ability Flagellation that it is the spec that can kind of get the most out of it. Because Sub is the spec that pumps out the most finishers, and to reach that stack cap on the Flagellation buff, Sub simply has the easiest life, whereas a spec like Assassination is happy if it can get a part of the maximum stacks. So the pacing of the specs and the combo point generation involved has a big impact on how much to get out of Flagellation from that aspect. So I can see Venthir being reinforced here for Sub, whereas for the other specs, that is a little bit of a different story.
Interesting.
So if Venthir becomes the go-to, remains, I guess, the go-to for Sub, would you guys see Venthir in Mythic Plus as well? What would kind of be the meta for Sub in 9.1, Covenant-wise?
I mean, you do use Flagellation on priority targets, so I can
that's always good because Tyrannical becomes a bitch after a while, but
it's a bit of an early prediction game right now because with these things like the versatility buff on the new legendary not lingering properly and them just nuking the Necrolord legendary last night in the latest patch, we see that things are still in flux and we don't know in what state they will go live. So I do not really want to make meta predictions of any kind
no
right now.
Predictions.
But yeah, as of right now, it looks like Venthir will continue to be the go-to for Sub, and potentially the legendary being a really strong legendary for Sub, which opens everything up to the philosophical questions about what place should Covenant legendaries have.
Okay.
I personally, as a player, don't like Covenant legendaries at all because they just add to the problem of Covenant tuning. We have this case, which might now happen with Sub, where the best legendary for the best Covenant is the best. And if you have any other Covenant for any other reason, you're kind of getting double screwed by not just having not the best Covenant, but also not access to the best legendary. So I think that is really sad to see.
It's fate.
Yes, I am a non-covenant maxing player who's a Night Fae and who gets the worst legendary in the history that I can remember. But so I'm a little pissed about that one, and the philosophical aspect of Covenant legendaries is not really up my page. So my perfect scenario, and I believe, is either Covenant legendaries don't exist or they don't matter. Because I'm not a big fan of the thing as a whole, but just that's my personal opinion.
Can you guys think of like a percentage difference from your sims? Like, for example, the Ventir legendary for sub versus any other. What would be like a difference in percentage damage? Because people will probably want to know, like, okay, if I really like Night Fae so much, I like Sepsis and being.
Sorry, you said Night Fae. Why would you go out of your way to play Night Fae on a class that doesn't really want Night Fae that much? Because everything else in the mom is Night Fae already.
Sepsis was good at some point for subbing PvP. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, the thing is, because from a noob's perspective, mechanical wise, I always thought Sepsis would be the sub way to go because you just get more stealth value, right?
Sure, but I think people are interested because we had a big talk, at the beginning, at the announcement of Shadowlands, and then in beta and alpha about how weighty will the covenants be for specs and stuff. And this is why I'm asking: do you guys have any like percentage differences between the upcoming legendaries?
It's really hard to predict because it's not only legendaries what the difference will be because. For example, like Ventir now has this food stuff where you can once a day get this food buff, and it also acts like a normal food. And I don't know if they changed it, but I don't think so. And like the pro players already like ask the community because it's tradable to get this item to them, and it gives 3% of the secondary stat, if I remember right, what should be roughly like 2 to 3% damage. So if the problem right now is we are not sure like how much impact the last tier of DPS soulbinds has from the trees, and we can assume like you get like 2% or 3% damage more if you like go with Ventir from the legendary, and you get around 1 to 1.5% more DPS because you don't play Necrolord, and you just have straight out like a bit higher damage because Necrolord is like others mentioned not the best for subtlety. But in the end, it's like it stacks up, and you can't predict without knowing everything. Not everything is implemented in Simcraft yet. Not everything is working in game, and there are other stuff also that are not really considered, like how well the gear in raid works for each spec.
Fair enough.
It's the kind of thing. What matters ultimately in the end is the total amount that you're doing and how everything interacts together. Like if you want to compare, for example, Ventir, Subrogue, you're gonna deal with the whole package of the new full soulbind trees once they are unlocked.
Those two, yeah.
The legendary on top, if that is the best choice for Ventir, and compare all of that together versus, I don't know, the Night Fae that has a whole tree unlocked, who will probably not be using the Covenant-specific legendary for Night Fae. So ultimately, what matters to the players and to the tuning is, of course, that whole package, and it's less about just looking at the legendaries as themselves. But it's a tricky thing, and especially with a Night Fate Lego, if you want a comparison there, like we said earlier, that I think the Obedience legendary for Ventir is around the 5% mark, beating that. The Night Fae legendary, which is absolutely horrible design, I just have to say that right out, is at maximum, I think I saw sims around 0.5% damage increase. If you mess it up, you can even lose damage just by using this legendary. It's very horrible.
That's what you want.
Oh man. I mean, just circling back to the whole philosophy, and when Ian, talked about and stubbornly defended that, there's going to be major differences between these. Well, my friend, you can actually lose damage if you fuck it up. So
not unheard of. And then speaking of 9.1, I did once ask you guys this because I think most of the raid testing has already been done. But in a world where obviously pretty much all of PvE content is favored towards ranged players, how do you guys see sub perform in the new raid? Because there's a lot of speculation right now.
2 shadow steps, baby. What you know?
There's a lot of talk about a lot of melee unfriendly fights, and I've seen a little bit of the Sylvanas fight, and I said no.
That's a fucking mess over there, let me tell you.
But in all honesty, in case the community perception is wrong on this, how do you guys feel with sub in the new raid? Is it melee unfriendly? Would you have trouble having high uptime on the bosses or on targets? Is there a lot of downtime? Is there like mechanics that are unfriendly towards sub? I guess rogues in general, but subs have different
Sub has good mobility.
Yeah. If you've tested anything in 9.1.
I can't be too specific about 9.1 because I haven't looked into the encounters that we'll see too much, and I haven't participated in any raid tests myself this time. So I can't really say too much. I've heard about Sylvanas being a lot of teleporting back and forth again. So we'll see how that is. If it's an end boss again that is about running behind a boss all the time, then that sounds like it would favor ranges. And the end boss is often deciding for what is brought to the raids, especially in the early progress.
Yep.
In general, I don't know how most of the bosses look like otherwise, so we'll have to see that. Generally speaking, I think what will make or break it for sub is how well the boss design in general lines up with the damage profile of sub. Sub has always seen strengths in benefiting from these regular windows of symbols of death bursts every 30 seconds. And if boss design favors that kind of thing and you don't have to miss out on many windows and you can potentially even use these windows because they align well with mechanics, then that would be a good sign for sub. There's some bosses like the Kel'Thas Shade, for example, where Symbols of Death was really strong because it aligned very well that you could use it into every shield to nuke that one. It was also pretty good for Sludge Fist because you could always make sure you have Symbols of Death windows for the increased damage windows. Things like that, if those play a role, I think could be a good sign for sub. Otherwise, it will depend on just general melee versus range-friendly boss design.
All right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I also think that sub has a lot of strength on a fight like the council fight, the dance, whatever that was called. I blanking on the name.
Yeah.
That one. So I think that sub had a big strength there, where if you had enough waiters in melee, you could do the AOE into eviscerate sort of funneling thing, which is quite high priority damage, even still after they got rid of Shuriken combo from Zool. Even without it, it's still quite good. So I think that there's definitely moments where sub has to shine, but they are kind of few and far between. A lot of the time you'll see stuff where, a 2-minute cooldown is just better. Or if you want a shorter cooldown, then you could just bring a mage with combust if you need that 1 minute. Like if there's a mechanic like a pillar that lasts, the 10 seconds on Sludge Fist and it comes up every minute, why would you want a spec with a 30-second cooldown if you could bring a spec with a 1-minute cooldown? So it kind of really depends on the fights, and the fights in general don't really play into sub that much, although there are kind of these shining moments every now and then where you can see sub kind of glisten through. The problem with that is even if it's good on fights, a lot of people will just open Warcraft logs and look at the overall. Mm-hmm. And something like Altimore, which is 2-target cleave, which sub is notoriously bad at, will then pull down the overall ranking quite a bit. And so even on, the overall right now, sub is towards the bottom. But if you pull up a fight like Hungering or Sludge Fist, or a fight where sub is a little bit better and plays into the strengths a little bit higher, you'll see that it's actually sort of a mid-range spec in those situations. So there's definitely a perception problem that comes into it. But like Mistler said, at the end of the day, it's mostly still melee versus ranged.
Yeah, also one thing that's really important is like the strength of Assassination will dictate if sub gets played. Like on the Clee fight that you mentioned, you will almost always go to Assassination or Outlaw. Like there's no reason to play sub, because like the low target cleave is the niche that sub sucks, and it's also what they tried to fix with Shuriken combo and then removed. It would be interesting how Shuriken combo would work out if they brought it back in, because you now have Black Powder, and with Black Powder you would need to decide to get the Empowered Eviscerate that gets even more emphasized or more upped by Shuriken combo or the AoE damage. So you really would even divide you would catch up with the overall damage a bit, because your single target would be higher. But as of now, on fights where you have single target, you will usually, unless there's a cooldown alignment, this is really great for sub, just go Assassination. And I can see some players like play sub because it's numerical, not super far ahead or behind. But I don't see it becoming like the Heat of the Month spec of work. It's more like outliner that you want to play if you like it, but don't need to play if you don't want to.
Gonna be a little bit edgy if you play sub rogue, baby. That's what's up. Not
what about those Sylvanas daggers though?
Yeah, did you guys see because it's, if I'm not mistaken, it is shadow damage that will be added there.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
That will favor sub rogue, although I do not know if any shadow damage multiplier both from the spec will actually affect that damage.
Deeper Dagger affects all shadow damage, so it will the conduit, the potency conduit.
Okay, so maybe with those on, do you guys think, I know it's a hard prediction to see, but with those daggers, maybe we'll bump it up even further?
I don't think so, because I did some simulations at the start of the X-Spec with how much DPS you gain additionally from deeper daggers, from stuff like shadow-based trinkets, and it was usually in the 0.1-2%
wow.
damage reach, so it's not an insane amount. With 9.1 we have a slightly higher gain, probably because we can get higher conduit levels. The problem is still, like, even if we get this, Assassination does scale slightly better with gear than Subtlety, and it will probably just end up being not an impact factor.
It will probably mostly still be about the item tuning in itself. Like stacking deeper daggers on top of it to bump up the shadow damage will be more like a nice bonus, but it won't make or break the item, I suppose.
Right, fair enough.
Won't have much of an effect, I think. It also kind of remains to be seen how strong it is, because we just got numbers on the Sylvanas dagger not too long ago. So we actually don't really have that much of an idea how strong it is or how strong it's supposed to be. That's kind of all still in flux. As far as I know, we don't even really have an idea if they stack, since we can equip 2 of them. if that doubles the damage, doubles the proc rate, doubles both, we kind of don't really have an idea right now. So it's all a little bit up in the air considering the information, how recent it is.
Yeah, well, at least from the Preach interview Ian had a while back, when the question was asked about the bow for hunters, I think Ian did say that they want to make it feel like almost like a legendary or something, that scale of power. So if that's the philosophy, maybe we'll see some some good numbers, at least for subtlety regarding that. But as you said, Whispyr, there's a lot of questions still to be.
Yeah,
it depends what the definition is of legendary in power.
Legendary weapon, not fucking ring.
If you want the power increase to be kind of like in the 3 to 5% range, that's where kind of things tend to lie on these new things. I think that most of like the deeper dagger conversation and stuff like that is a complete non-issue. But if they for some reason decide magically that it should be 10% or something like that, it's more akin to like a legendary for a mage or a hunter or something, then you will definitely see some sort of shift, but that's all up in the air on tuning. So,
and since they're only adding this for hunters and rogues at the moment, I don't know if they're gonna add anything more. It was a little bit weird because obviously not everybody's getting it, and at least for hunters you do get an ability, so it felt a little bit out of place. So I don't think they're gonna overly buff them to a point where it will kind of like make the spec more competitive or bump it in the overall meters by a lot for people to just go, okay, I can play sub because I get the daggers.
I can see them, judging by how things worked out in the last couple of years, I can see them actually going that route. It's like, okay, sub has some problems, let's just buff the shadow damage out of the fuck of this thing, because they're gonna use daggers. Assassination won't benefit as much as sub for the shadow damage. Let's just still fix the spec with more shadow damage on the daggers. I can totally see them do that. I mean, I would not be surprised. Let's put it like that.
I mean, if they really go that far and make sub really, really strong, a single target due to it, they probably just like nerf it.
Yeah, well,
I don't see it being...
The other problem, which goes back to what Mistler said at the start, which is sub rogue not getting changes is the problem. If you try and go that route where you'll say, oh well, we'll just buff deeper daggers or something, and then the dagger will do a bunch of damage from Sylvanas, you go into the next tier and now you're taking away the dagger, right? That Sylvanas dagger won't be there in the next tier, and you were relying on that dagger for power, so then you go into the next tier and you have nothing. And then you're right back at the start where sub is asking to be changed and needs a buff, and there's no buff coming.
System.
It's basically a running theme with well, we can make a philosophy about the bar of power bullshit, but it's what kind of happened on an expansion basis, right?
Well, so far we had this kind of thing was tier sets before, right? So you got a power in the tier sets. And I mean, at this point, I think it's almost confirmed that we're going to have tier sets in 9.2. I don't think they can go back on this one. I don't think they can afford anymore because they kind of almost confirmed this. So you could say that, okay, you're losing the dagger, but you might be getting a tier set bonus. Whether or not it's going to be sufficient to make you feel like you're not losing too much or anything going from 9.1 to 9.2 remains to be seen. But a running theme of the systems is that you're always feeling like you're losing something going forward. And when an expansion comes and you don't really get anything new permanent, hardly ever, unless the unpruning can be considered anything.
What about if in 9.2 they bring back the shuriken combo on tier sets for sub? Would that be something?
I mean, not really, right? Because if you're bringing back a tier set, if you bring back shuriken combo, you're really only going to have it as a niche. Shuriken combo wasn't really an issue outside of Zool. Zool was the thing that made it an issue. It was also kind of an issue, not really, in Mythic Plus, where you would drag ads into a boss and then kind of spam eviscerates into the boss, but that was more of, I want to say, creative use of game mechanics more than
call it
anything else. Yeah, it's more of a strategy.
Nobody does this in MDI at all, right?
So hold on. So Mystler called it strategy, and I think Fu has a different opinion on it. What do you think?
No, I think it's what Mythic Plus is about, like making this insane boost, this keeping this mob up that is does terrible damage to the group just so you can kill the boss some seconds faster. That's like what powers Mythic Plus. It's what makes it for the viewer engaging.
Nowadays,
like I think Limit Max did mention it too. Those big pulls we saw in Legion, where you pulled essentially the entire dungeon and tried to survive somehow and killed everything. That was what was really exciting about watching MDI, and they kind of changed it up. So I don't know.
It's definitely entertaining for sure in an MDA setting.
Well, hey, I remember
the
seeing
whole fucking dungeon pulls, like see all those.
Well, yeah, but I think I saw, I don't know, Echo, which team is Jinji in? They did this for Halls of Atonement. They did a pull, at least the ones that I saw, like a couple of packs with the Fire Mage and the Boomy into the first boss of Halls of Atonement. So it's like, oh, okay, so it's still here. Then what's the problem?
Yeah. Well, you didn't see any sub-rogues in those rosters, did you?
What? I thought sub-rogues were banned, though, from MDI.
It looks like it, man. Shit. All right, guys. So we're getting to the little bit of the closing chapters of the podcast, and we usually do this, try to prepare you all for it. So here's the question for all three of y'all. If you had the power to invent an ability for sub-rogue, what would it be? Would it work? How would it work? Don't care about the balance. Let Ian worry about that. Or
he's good with that.
Because yeah, he has a proven record of it. Or what would you bring back if you don't want to go into the route of I could invent this? I'm feeling some DFA vibe, some I'm not sure. Anybody can go
absolutely. You're absolutely feeling some DFA vibes, because I would say I would bring back DFA, but in a changed form. Like maybe make it a shadow attack, maybe make you disappear and reappear after 1 or 2 seconds, and then do the big hit instead of like doing the animation log thing. Where you can clip to the floor. Maybe do something with the shadow damage, shadowy height, and do damage after fantasy. And it would also like go really well with the damage amp stacking, so you really would feel again this big powerful hit, and maybe also have the damage split similar to DFA with you vanish in shadow and you do an AoE and then come back with a really big attack.
And that would also, to add up on that, kind of be an interesting consideration for placement for Secret Technique, which when it was added in the first place seemed like it was the new DFA version without the positional locking.
Yeah.
But as it is right now, it has kind of lost its really. It still has kind of a purpose, but it's not as spectacular as it was. We have a good AoE finisher now that it will be buffed in 9.1. We have a good single target finisher, and Sectric is trying to kind of fill this strange in between. It has that arbitrary 6 target cap instead of the 8 target caps that we have elsewhere, which seems also a little bit random. I guess it was to balance out that the overall damage isn't too different, but it's a little bit weird. I think that talent could definitely use some nerf, or that suggestion as a replacement, for example.
Cool. What about you, Whispyr?
So instead of taking the easy route and saying DFA for the third time, I would actually like to suggest bringing back an ability from WoD called Shadow Reflection. I think that Shadow Reflection could actually be an interesting kind of concept on current sub. The way it worked was it was a 2-minute cooldown. You press the button, and then the next, I think, 8 seconds, maybe 9, it memorized the spells that you cast in the order that you cast them.
That was cool. Yeah.
And then it would repeat the abilities again.
And it was a shadowy form of yourself, right? You can actually see it too.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's the fantasy aspect. I would like it to see renamed. I don't think we need another shadow ability. But the fantasy is there. the fantasy is
there. My evil brother
and,
or something.
I think that it could also help push sub into more of a bursty role. Especially if you add it in as a talent, maybe that could be a cooldown. You could have something like if there's a fight that requires a 2-minute cooldown, for example, you could take Shadow Reflection as a talent, and it would essentially double your DPS in that time frame where you need it. You could cast it, and it would be a huge increase, sort of Vendetta-esque, I guess. And I feel like that'd be pretty cool.
Was Shadow Reflection like a positional cooldown? Did it like spawn where you were, or did it move with you?
I think the ability itself was a little bit janky during WoD. I don't remember all the intricate details of it, especially because I was a bit of a new player. But it spawned a copy sort of near the enemy that you were attacking, and I think that like you can think of it similar to the little shadow clones that you have on Secret Technique right now.
Or Akaris. I think I would call it the precursor to the Akari. Both
exactly.
We had in Legion as well as the Legendary that we have now. I think it used the pet logic, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. I think it was a pet sort of based thing, but I don't think that the abilities could actually miss. I could be wrong on that. I could be misremembering. But I think it was similar to Akari's, where Akari's kind of does a Shadow Strike, you do a Shadow Strike, it does a Shadow Strike, you do a Shadow Strike, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it would happen after a while. It would just mimic everything you did in that time frame.
Could be like cool. Like Windwalker's clowns. You just don't control them anymore. They just follow the target around and just do their thing.
It's sort of similar. It was different in a way because it just appeared after and would just replicate what you did. I know that would be cool. I don't know the percentages though, because it would be cool, but to just like 100% replicate plus the numbers. But we said we're not going to talk about balance because Ian has a cool.
Either way, it sounds like fun because you can like prep for that 2-minute, do a lot of cool shit in those 10 seconds, and then the clone will replicate all that. That would be
bring
cool.
DFA back in. Shadow Reflection. I mean, what's the problem?
I can throw in a third idea if we still have.
Go
for it.
Yes.
It's not my own. I have to give full credit for that to Koji, but it's a great idea that I do want to mention. And that I would really like to at least try on some kind of sandbox server if there was a thing, which is about the issue between Dark Shadow versus Enveloping Shadows, which is kind of a theme talent choice that we have.
Yes.
And as we went into Shadowlands with the change to the base charge of Shadow Dance only being 1 charge, Dark Shadow has become pretty much a non-pick niche talent that is behind, because the buffer of having more charges is just too good. If you do not have that buffer, then you have issues with wasting cooldown reduction, which is a big part of the spec. So more charges is just really strong. And the idea that Koji brought up is thinking about it. Why does Enveloping Shadows need to add a charge and increase the cooldown reduction? It seems a little bit like going too far and nudging that too far in that direction. What about making baseline 2 charges, for example, or even 3, but let's go with 2. And instead of increasing both, reducing a charge actually, but then increasing the cooldown reduction, which should make it more interesting to be balanced versus do I want these many dances or do I want like baseline many dances, or do I want more reduction to be able to go into dances more? Might make the tuning more interesting. It would be something that I would like to give like a playstyle to see how that feels, but right now as Enveloping Shadows is designed, it's just leaning it too far into the benefits versus Dark Shadow.
That would be actually pretty cool. Well, in the hopes of some people watch or listen these podcasts from a Blizzardy dev environment or whatever. It's all of this, even the bashing and the feedback and ideas, it's all coming out of a place of love.
Yeah, so whenever you hire a sub developer, can watch this podcast.
A sub developer that has so many meanings.
Oh,
it's all good. Guys, I guess we have to close it up here. And once again, a huge thank you to Fu, to Mistler, to Whispyr for once again taking out of the time and joining on the talk and chat. Hopefully, some of you guys who are watching or listening got some out of it. I would say, I'm hoping everybody agrees here, sub is looking better at 9.1, potentially.
Yep.
So definitely
that's good. Always root for the underdogs. I like seeing subs in my raids.
Oh yeah. And for obviously a lot more updated information and sims and all of that juicy information, please check out the Ravenhold Discord channel. And also we're gonna have links for all the boys, for Mistler, for Whispyr, for Fu, on everything they want to provide, in terms of like Twitter, socials, Twitches, and all of that. Check it out in the description. And next time we're gonna kick off the 9.1 podcast, and we should really get in Koji too with everybody else here. I think that would make an interesting dynamic of discussion. Because I was thinking, it's like, man, I'm missing somebody. It's definitely Koji. All right, so thank you for listening and watching, everybody. You guys have a great week ahead. See y'all in the next one.
Take care.
Bye.
I'ma do it /bow. Still I play WoW. Still I play WoW.